What we want to do now is give Rob a chance to talk about his background with M&As and working with global companies from an operations perspective and all other perspectives, including being an investor. And then we're going to move to Mana and then Jeremy, and then we'll kind of open it up.
Well, terrific. Thank you. So my background is as a CFO, COO to early stage companies, kind of a wide range of different types of companies, and also to a corporate acquirer, a company that did a lot of acquisitions and a lot of corporate venture capital. And we did it on a global scale, and I'm finding too many of the businesses I work with now are global in nature. I mean, in that there are so many different touch points around the globe that involve the businesses. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but a little bit about what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
So I work with a lot of different types of companies for the last couple of years. Essentially, Early Growth Financial Services is a CFO or a fractional CFO to 18% of all venture capital and investor-funded businesses in the early stage.
Okay.
The company, I actually work with a lot of different types of companies, ranging from security tech to many types of SaaS businesses to affiliate marketing, and to a biofuels company. The biofuels company is kind of on the far end of the spectrum. They just bought a biofuels plant for $800. Well, it was built for $800 million, but bought it for a lot less out of bankruptcy. They're looking at moving operations into China as well. The other companies I'm working with it's an affiliate marketing company that now in the early stage world is cash flow positive, so it's terrific. My background in international is not only each of those businesses have either customers internationally, management team internationally, or subsidiaries internationally. The company I worked for 20 years was a company that made locomotives. The company did all sorts of different types of things, from making an environmentally efficient locomotive with a lot of technology to making the control systems. And they did it in many different parts of the world, ranging from having operations in Brazil, India, Croatia, and Australia, and selling into many different countries around the world. I counted up at one point how many countries we sold into, and I think it was over 30 different countries that we did everything from multi-million-dollar sales to a couple 100,000 sales. And our acquisition expansion was kind of all the above type of expansion. It was acquiring a supplier to setting up by corporate venture type of funded subsidiaries to make, for instance, the control systems of locomotives. Flashing forward to today, that experience has become very useful in the sense of many of the companies I'm working with now one has a German subsidiary, another has a management team in Brazil, part of the management team, and then another has a lot of their work, the programming work is being done in India.
And that's all one company? Or are they all different companies that are doing that?
That's a couple different companies.
Okay. Well, we want to ask some more questions about that, but thank you for sharing that. It's a lot of experience, especially on the operations and even the manufacturing side, sounds like. And the customers, you want to get close to the customer, is that right? That's part of it.
Yes. I mean, well, part of it is you're following the customer, or maybe there's an opportunity with the customer as well. And it may be very, very unique to that. It's very unique to the situation. So, really kind of thinking about it in terms of, current VC speak. I mean, is there a use case, for it? Is it something that, that we can do? Is it a product and service that we can provide in that particular country? And is it something that's going to be immediately profitable, or is it a provable path to profitability? And the reason I say that is that international, it's a lot harder to realize. I mean, the business, your business plan, what you're trying to do there than it is here, just because unless you have a team there and unless you've operated there.
Well, that's a perfect transition into what Mana was going to talk about around digital marketing.
We just had this moment with each other.
So Mana, let's hear a little bit about Lifespan Digital and just your point of view about marketing in an international market.
Yeah, and the perfect transition comes from the fact that Lynn and I talked about how you want people on the ground in the places where you're trying to expand. That it's close to impossible to try to grow your business in another country without the insiders, right, who understand that culture. And talking about culture, what we do at Lightspan Digital is that we're digital storytellers. So we help businesses kind of unpack what they're all about, their mission, their vision, and why should people care about them in bits of digital content. We find the right people online. We help our brands be relevant to them, get in front of them, and then we look for what motivates them. How can we get them to move, to take action on our behalf, whether it's directly to buy or to spread the word about us.
So can you tell us a little bit about just what you see in international markets, some of the things that people really need to think carefully about before they move too fast?
It's madness. So I am myself the outcome of an international move. I grew up in Romania. I went to college in Bulgaria. I came to the US, and now I own a business here. So I've lived lots of different places. And I can tell you that I wouldn't know how to market in Romania, although I grew up there. Because so many years have passed, the culture is different, what resonates with people now, what influences them. I'm out of touch with that. And so when we do international work, we always look for a local agency or an entity on the ground that can help us tap into, what are the stories that are resonating with people now? How do people make meaning in their local markets? And so what do we need to do to appeal to them? So we've done some international work, but we always look to first understand that local angle. We're not just going to jump in without knowing what makes people tick in that country. And I'll give a very simple example. A friend of mine in Romania keeps sending me jokes, little image jokes via WhatsApp. And by the way, WhatsApp is a thing that it's commonly used outside of the US, Americans don't use, but it's a social network. So if you do business internationally, you may want to use WhatsApp instead of other social networks. And so he sends me these crude jokes. They're just terrible. In the US, they would never be acceptable. But in Eastern Europe, they are. And again, if we were to go into Romania and try to promote something the American way, it may appear really dry or disconnected, because there it's still acceptable to crack jokes that here are not politically correct. So it's really important that we get into their mindset, and also that we're able to cross our own limitations. Just because we think this way and we think it's appropriate to do things here this way, that doesn't mean that that's a reality everywhere. So it can be really challenging, because at times it may feel like it's not ethical to do marketing this way, to say these things, to take this approach. But it may be that that's the reality in that market.
So it sounds like you had something to say about that, Jeremy.
Oh, I mean, I have lots of stuff to say about everything. So,
so let's hear a little bit about, the big news, and it was all over the place, that you merged with Imagineer Technology Group. And I just wanted, everybody to understand sort of what was the motive behind it? What's the goal? Why is it going to be a great thing?
Sure. So I guess the 2 or 3 second or minute, as the case may be, story there is that as of a few weeks ago, I was running a software company called Synapse Software Labs, which we are actually relatively young. So Synapse is 3 years old, but we had clients here in the U.S. as well as in Asia, actually, of all places to expand internationally. First, that's where we had chosen to send our platform and to start selling our platform. We merged with a company called Imagineer Technology Group, which is another relationship management software company in the asset management vertical, or asset management industry specifically. So their clientele have traditionally been investment managers, hedge funds, institutional allocator, endowment, pension fund type of customers. It's a super interesting space that I'd also had the opportunity to work in for years, and for 15 years before this as well. And the first company that I started as well as back in the days when I was in investment banking on Wall Street. So we did this particular transaction because at the end of the day, it made a lot of sense for us with regards to where we're trying to take our business, both domestically and overseas. And also made a lot of sense for us from a culture fit standpoint, both with the teams that we have in the U.S. and the teams that we have abroad as well, both with Synapse and with Imagineer. And it's a business that for better and for worse, I'd had a chance to get to know for a very, very long time. The founder of that company is a dear friend, and late last year we kind of got together and said, hey, this could be a lot of fun if we put these two businesses together and see what we can do next. And so that's kind of how it all came together.
Well, this is not your first rodeo, so I had trouble counting how many companies you've started in.
Done a few, yeah. So I think 7 is the most accurate number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you talk about culture fit, that's probably one of the most important things to consider when you're the customer.
Yeah.
And B, when you're the employee.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
So how do you work internationally? What are some examples of where you've worked internationally kind of with the team that's internal to you?
Yeah, well, I've been kind of lucky in that my very first true professional experiences started out overseas. When I was in graduate school, I had the fortune of attending university in Japan. And once I finished my degree there, I spent a fair number of months working inside of a Japanese bank in their capital markets and trading group. And so my very first real office job, suit and tie, go to the office thing, actually was in Tokyo. Which was really fascinating. I had spent just over 3 years in Tokyo, well, in Japan, I guess, before taking that role. But starting my career in an international environment, which for me was international environment, was eye-opening in a number of different ways, because it sort of taught me from day one the value of looking at any business and any business relationship through a different lens, and I think that's such an important thing to be able to do as an entrepreneur or as an executive, whenever you're dealing with a business that has no boundaries, right? That's geographically dispersed and has customers and teammates all over the place. So the reality is, I think if you don't approach your business, particularly as you start to expand internationally, with an eye toward making it fit and understanding the cultural values and the intricacies and, quite frankly, the idiosyncrasies of other places, you're going to have a really hard time making your business fit or making your business work in that culture and in that region.
So what are some examples? We go to lessons learned at the end, but still some things that, even the fact that you've got 2 different industries that you're covering from the customer relationship management standpoint, and you're co-located. What are some things to kind of, for people to be sensitive to when it comes to working with people across the world? I
think maybe everyone could chime in if they
yes,
if
they now
want
we
to
can get to open it up.
So a couple of ideas. To begin, the first thing is that it kind of goes back to the everything I learned in kindergarten, right? So the thing to always remember is that not everybody you're working with, and not everyone you're speaking with, has the same background that you do. We all have a different and, quite frankly, diverse way of thinking about issues and looking at the world. And whenever you're dealing with a business relationship, whether that's a intra-company or extra-company, I think that's one of the, if not the most important thing to always keep in the back of your mind. Like, Mana and I are different. We may be very, very similar, but we're also different. And she has a different perspective than I have about a lot of things, I'm sure. And part of the fun of getting to know your teammates and your clients is understanding what those differences are, and then building around those together to sort of create a more solid foundation from which to build a really substantial, meaningful working relationship and partnership. I think that's key.
We do both have a strong handshake.
We do. We have a
we
discovered
that very quickly.
Yeah. It's actually what Rob walked in, and when I shook Rob's hand, I missed his hand halfway. So I gave him this like dead fish handshake just now, and so I actually had to stop him and say, "Hold on, let's do this again."
Thank you. So, what else would you all like to talk about around this merging of cultures or putting multiple cultures together as a team? Is there something else you've learned that you'd like to share?
Well, I actually have a question.
Sure.
I'd love to hear what you guys think. My first suit at the office job was with HSBC, which is a big bank. Fundamentally, the culture is fairly Asian, very conservative company. And I always found it interesting that they tried to have this international culture. And it's very hard to apply the same thing to every country, especially for a company of that size. So in Asia, the culture is more conservative. In the US, we were risk takers, right? So how do you try to apply the same culture across internationally in a company like that, or do you try to tweak it at a regional level? And how far would you go? How lenient would you go at a regional level?
So my 2 cents there and my experience there is that the key, I think, is to define at the very top level shared values, the core values of the business, and then ultimately figure out how to translate those values into the other culture. And the other thing is too, and HSBC is a perfect example, right? Because it's this interesting bank that's China and Britain, right? And all this madness from 100 plus years, and then and slowly but surely became also an American thing, and it's all over the place. It's really global. But generally speaking, I think the home base or the home region, the founding region for the company, ultimately sets the pace and the tone for culture forever. And so if we did a lot of business in Hong Kong and Singapore and Tokyo as well. And like businesses that are started in Singapore and run principally from Singapore have a very different feel from those that are started in Hong Kong, from those that are started in Tokyo, from those that are started in South Korea, from those that are started in Beijing. And you get that local thing. And even though as they expand from region to region, wherever that region may be, I think the key is remembering and looking at the original intent of the values and the culture that was created by the founding team that put the company together in the first place, and then finding a way to apply those values to the other languages, the other regions, versus trying to say, hey, we're gonna because now we do most of our business in Europe or most of our business in America, we're gonna try to use those values as the primary driver, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think my take on it is that it's flexibility. I mean, it's the capability to adjust, because many times you don't realize how things are going to be different until you're actually in the middle of it. And being able to focus on, in the very beginning, on the operations of, okay, what is it specifically do we need to do? And start to figure out how do you execute that from a very basic level. And once you start to do that, all the differences start to become very apparent. And that's when you need to be able to adjust on how you're doing things for that particular market.
Yeah. From a digital marketing perspective, my last role at HSBC, I was a consultant, digital marketing consultant, helping with HSBC India and HSBC Brazil. And what we found is that there's some fundamentals of how you do marketing that apply no matter where you go. For example, it's always a good idea to do A/B testing. You don't just jump in with one message full speed. And that would apply internationally, right? But in India, they loved giving out movies and DVDs as perks. In Brazil, they loved to have fun, and their advertising was a lot more upbeat and fun. So we couldn't have determined those for them, but we had a templated method of doing things that we knew was successful. And as long as you can translate that across borders, then you can add that cultural layer at that local level.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Did you have something else?
I
just wanted to.
I would just say I think there's a lot to be said about finding themes, right? And that's to your point with marketing across different markets. You can find a theme and then work on variations, of that theme in each local market. One example that we use all the time is we talk about like football, not American football, but like real football. And one of the things that's interesting is anywhere else you go in the world, like football is a relatively easy sell, right? It's one of the most commonly loved sports and activities of most human beings across the planet. And finding ways to localize the love around a marketing message specifically here, right? To localize a message around the love and the excitement and the passion and the vigor and the excitement associated with football is easier. I'm putting air quotes here. Easier in non-U.S. markets, but at the same time, you can't translate that back here because this is the one market where soccer just doesn't work. It doesn't translate.
In the U.S., we think it's boring,
right?
And everywhere else in the world,
it's amazeballs, right?
Yeah.
Or we think American football is the one game because it's 100 million viewers, but the average soccer football game across the planet gets 400 million, right? So like how what's the real big game here, right? And it's an interesting way to think about things, I think.
Yeah, and that one actually has a lot to do also with influencers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's celebrity attached to football/soccer everywhere in the world. We don't have celebrity soccer players in the U.S. We have celebrity football players. We have celebrity everything else. And so so people pay attention to influencers, and that gives the international market the opportunity to use soccer and make those associations with people. If that celebrity is into that, I want to be into that too. Whereas here we pay attention to the Kardashians. So
well, what you said is I think also interesting and applies to intra-company culture as well, right? Especially as you're looking to expand your business globally. One of the things that I've always found to be most successful is to take your internal culture carriers and make them your expats, right? So you've got, if you're a business that started in the US and you're trying to go into Europe or Asia or some other part of the world, or heck, even north of the border or south of the border, one of the things I've always found to be essential is, number one, not just sending a single soul to that new market. You're destined to fail. Fail slowly, but you're destined to fail. But if you move into a market with the appropriate investment, the appropriate number of people, who most of whom should be locals, you can do a lot of work and really shortcut a lot of the effort required to have your internal culture both cultivated, nurtured, and spread internally by sending some of your strongest culture carriers from from the home region, if you will, over into those markets to have them just be there, right? Your culture carriers take your culture and drive your passion and your vision and your mission better than any PowerPoint can, or better than any manual can, right? So I found just having them working with your new teammates who happen to be locals and just being immersed in that culture helps to drive your cultural values to your new business partners and ultimately out to your clients in those regions as well.
We're basically talking about missionaries.
Yeah, or influencer marketers, right? And the question is whether you're influence marketing outside your four walls or within them.
Mm-hmm.
And how you implement culture in a particular country is so much dependent upon what you're doing. That is, what is your objective in that market? I mean, it's not just that we're trying to replicate the same business in this, in another country. There needs to be a strategic way in which you're trying to enter that that country, and it needs to be based upon that particular market. So some examples, for instance, company I work for wanted to get more involved in more sales in Europe. And the question was, where do you go? How do you do it? What country can you capitalize your strengths as well as the strengths of that country in order to get into that marketplace? And in this instance, it was so industry specific and so country specific. So for example, the company I was working with, we decided that Zagreb in Croatia was a good example of the place to go because they had the skill sets necessary to the tech skill sets as well as engineering skill sets in order to make the product, and the blue collar capability, kind of the people on the line to actually work on it. Versus, other countries didn't necessarily have those sorts of skill sets in Europe. Plus, it was a low cost provider, place to go that we could make the product. Although, kind of one of the lessons learned is that although they may be doing the same thing, they may not have the same level of productivity for a number of reasons. It might be cultural, it might be how you're managing the business with them, or it could be just, it could be the regulations in the business that you may not have anticipated. But in that instance, the way we looked at it was, okay, we're going to this marketplace because, here's the reason behind it. Is that we have a place where we can produce the product. It's a great way to distribute it through all of Europe, and we could take our strengths, which was we already knew the fundamental engineering behind the product. We had all the sales relationships so we could drive the sales. And that's the way in which we could enter the marketplace. But then again, with a different type of business, it could be totally different. For instance, a company I'm working with, they want to figure out, okay, how do they market in Europe? They're actually a B2C type of company, but they realized that there was a huge opportunity in this space to actually go to banks and market it as it's a credit product, and go through the banks and do an enterprise-wide market. So they're really doing a B2B type of market to do the distribution of their product. And it's interesting because it's very dependent on that marketplace. So all the privacy protocols and regulations that's been being implemented in Europe, all the banks are really struggling to try and put in place solutions for these. Whereas in the U.S., it's an issue here and becoming more prevalent, but it's more consumer driven, rather than being B2B driven. So
what you're saying is that the pain is more prevalent in a particular area, and that's what you captured.
Right. When you look for that hole in the marketplace, you look, what is the use case that it's actually going to work? So you kind of need to flow to that point where that's what your venture, what you're looking for in going into a new market is that, what is going to work? What is going to be profitable in that market? Where's the opportunity? And that's what you're trying to do. And given your existing product, what you're doing or service, your management team and your capabilities, and looking at each individual market on how you can access that market, given those characteristics there.
That's interesting. Anything else that you've discovered, Mana, about when people think they have the answer in terms of the marketing plan in a new market and something goes haywire?
Yeah. I find that one of the most critical pieces that oftentimes are missing when companies try to expand even regionally within the U.S., so expand into a new culture, is that they fail to see that they haven't built their ethos in that marketplace. Ethos meaning the character of the speaker. Why should I trust you? And building credibility is a big effort. But a lot of times we think that we have a great product and there's a pain point that this product is solving, and we go in and we forget that you may have a great product. If they don't trust you, they're not going to buy it. And we've seen companies spend millions of dollars in advertising with very slim results because they went straight for the sale instead of spending the time up front building up that ethos. Branding, we call it branding here, but ethos is very specific to credibility and trust. And that big, why should I care? Why should I buy it from you? Versus the guy that's been doing business in my country for the past 20 years. And particularly some countries in Europe are very loyal to their local brands, and it's very hard to change, to enter a market like that without a really strong plan to build credibility.
Two examples actually come to mind that are, I think they're both funny, but I'm kind of a dork. One is it's Chevrolet, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but man, it was, I don't even remember what it was anymore, probably 20 years ago. Chevy decided, hey, we're gonna, we have a lot of manufacturing and other stuff happening down in Mexico. Let's start selling cars down there. And so one of the very first cars, or the first car that Chevy tried to sell in Mexico was the Nova, which in Spanish means don't go. And but no one ever bothered to sort of figure out, hey, do we speak Spanish? Do we understand Spanish? And do we need to change the way that we market this particular product before we try to put it on the market down there? And of course, it was a joke. Everyone realized, wow, obviously this car is not going to go, but it instantly destroyed any credibility that they had or had been trying to build in the market as a sophisticated purveyor of fine automobiles. And the other example actually that came to mind too, it's also happens to deal with Mexico, but it was when Taco Bell when Yum Brands decided to expand their efforts in Mexico. They opened up several Taco Bell restaurants, and nobody would go to them because it's not real Mexican food, right? It's like fake all the way around. And ultimately, they all shut down within a few months.
That's a big mistake.
No one would go. Right, but again, and they had the foresight and I guess the wisdom to change their product names because they realized, like a Taco Bell taco is not a real taco, but it still didn't matter, right? You couldn't bring they couldn't get instant credibility in a brand new market that they weren't known, because they had not just the wrong product, but they had the wrong fit, right? They never figured out, how do I take the Taco Bell brand and turn it into something that like a Mexican audience would actually enjoy and want to be part of.
One of the most commonly called out names that we've heard in when a brand tries to cross borders is arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to a number of brands that were either European and in the US they were seen as arrogant, or were American and they were seen as arrogant somewhere else outside the US. And the examples that you gave are two examples of just boldly going somewhere.
Of course, we're we're from America, right?
Yeah. We're invincible, and and we get called out for being arrogant, and that's a reality that and all Americans now know this, that if you go to Europe, you may get called out for being an American, arrogant and cocky and not listening, and so and we see that with brands too.
And certainly to your earlier point of you really need a local partner many times, be it an agent or a distributor that really knows the marketplace. I mean, and if you think about it, some countries you do not have a choice. I mean, so if you don't think like Saudi Arabia, if you're not dealing with somebody from the House of Saud, you're not going into that marketplace. Or Korea or Japan, if you're not in a Chaebol or Kiriatsu and somewhere in that chain selling into it in the right spot, you're not gonna make a sale. But there's other ways to do it as well, and sometimes in the smaller markets, emerging markets, you can acquire your way into it, or if it's a disruptive technology, that's also another great way to get into the marketplace where you can do an acqui-hire or team up with somebody as part of your management team, either have a subsidiary or bring them on and reach and have the local feel and flavor of that business. And I'm thinking of one example recently where a company, the one I mentioned in Germany, where we actually have a separate GmbH to conduct the business. It's fundamentally no different than the product isn't for the US, except it's private labeled for that business, but it's really the same people, except there's a local person there that's part of the team, and it's just a different entity.
Interesting. So what happens with the people when you take the people and you move them to a different culture, and are they accepted? Like, you bring your culture to a different culture. What can you say has gone well, or what things were you surprised about?
Well, in my case, to be honest, I've always had good experiences. We've never sent somebody from one of our companies, one of our teams, to another place and had them have a miserable experience. I have friends who have been in situations where they've gone over to another country as an expat, and for one reason or another, they didn't have a great experience. But I think to be honest, I think you can usually, as a manager, right, as a business owner or part of the management team, it's not that hard to figure out, I think, in general, which of your teammates are going to be able to thrive in a place far, far away, and which of those aren't. And sort of being open and honest with yourself and with your team or teammates that you're considering for an overseas position, I think is the first and best way to go. And for sure.
Can you give any advice to the leaders, to the entrepreneurs? What should they be looking for in the leaders that they consider to be expats? Because I don't know that I would know that intuitively.
I think it depends on the market and the industry. I think it's, for example, a big part of most of my background is financial services and financial services technology. And it's not uncommon at all for a business that actually a good friend of mine a number of years ago, who was a partner at a large wealth management company, actually headquartered in Chicago, had decided as a business that they were going to expand into the UK. They wanted to build a more significant presence there so they could attract more non-US assets to their non-US funds. But in order to do that, they also thought it was really important that they bring the culture of the mothership to the UK and then build around that culture while there. And so, when they first went into that market, they hired 20 or 30 locals. And then this gentleman took his family and moved over to the UK for 4 years or something like that it was originally, and plunked down and went to work and brought a number of other people from the US over as well. But the ratio was maybe, one expat to 5 locals, right? And because you don't need that many. In most situations, you just don't, because you can, generally speaking, in almost every industry, you can find local talent that you're already competing with, or that you would be competing with, or you have been competing with peripherally while you're making your mind up to get into that marketplace. Every business, every industry is full of enough competition all over the planet that it's pretty easy to find people who get what you do, and then it's a matter of enticing them to come work, learning whether or not they fit in your culture, and then entice them to come over to help you and your execs out as they're trying to set the stage.
A lot of large companies have international leadership programs that are basically designed to test people on how they would do working across borders. And they're very rigorous programs where literally only 1 out of 10 will make it. And those are the people that then you place them in a country to take a leadership role. So a lot of companies do it that way.
Are there any particular characteristics that you found that work with those people?
I think they have to be really good with change, and handle ambiguity well. Yeah. And it takes a certain level of resilience. And I think that hard for me, as somebody who's moved from country to country, being away from family is very hard for people, especially for extended periods of time. And so it takes people who are pretty independent minded and don't need a ton of emotional support.
Yeah, you need people who are adventurers, right? Who are happy just running out and doing whatever, and being alone. Because you are alone when you're working overseas, even if with your team, you're still alone because you are the one American in I don't know, Luxembourg, or the one American in Zimbabwe, or the one American in Seoul that's doing what you do, right? And it can be lonely, which is why you absolutely need people who can just get out there and who won't be fazed by that, but who also embrace it as a challenge. It's like, great, like I'm the one person from this industry in this city. This is great. I'm going to go find the other expats and the locals, and we're going to have a great time, and we're going to do crazy stuff together, and it'll be great.
Right.
That's unique.
Yeah, another trick I've seen companies use is to actually look for their employees who have studied abroad. Mm-hmm. And use that as and then interviewing them to see how was your experience studying abroad, and then use that to assess if this person would do okay moving internationally again. And
also, I think it's a mindset. The key for people is how the person you want to hire that can do well in international operation is really a mindset of how do I solve this?
Yeah.
How do I figure it out? It's someone who can deal with that ambiguity, but also can figure out, okay, how do I put together a system to make this work? Given all the issues that I'm dealing with now, that many of which are unanticipated when they arise.
Well, the thing is, too, especially when you're a smaller business, and you start looking at and then planning for and ultimately rolling out your global expansion strategy, I think there's all the planning in the world will never actually prepare you for what really happens when you put people on the ground. And I remember with one of our companies, we were expanding into Hong Kong, and we were enticed, I think is the right word to use there, into making a move into Hong Kong because we were getting all kinds of inbound traffic, all kinds of inbound leads, right? Just out of the blue, people call us, we've heard about your platforms. We've heard that you guys are great with clients. In this case, we were a web-based application on the software side. So, we know you can be, anywhere and everywhere all at the same time with your platforms. That's great. We'd love for you to come and sell to us. And I think to our credit, at the time we had enough foresight to say, well, that's exciting and all, but we've not sold our platforms in Asia before, and we are not quite sure how many people we're going to need to put on the ground there, and we're not quite sure how this is going to go, and so we'll take our time, and over the course of 12 months, we sort of tried to figure it out a little bit. And then after that first 12 months, we said, okay, we got a bunch of customers there now. We're being very careful. We've been very open, but we need to try to figure out if we're going to put people from here on the ground there, or if we're going to hire a full local team and try to do our thing. And we chose ultimately to send, first anyway, to send one representative over to the region, someone from sales who was a super great guy and super passionate and energetic and was going to be great. And then we augmented that person with on the ground, with feet on the street, locals, and it ended up working out fairly well in the end. But it's never without hardship and struggle and pain and suffering. And so it's why it's essential that you get someone who is a culture carrier for your business, who's not going to leave you because they get frustrated, but who's going to every day go take that frustration that they're feeling and turn it into positive energy for the business and for the market.
I'm sorry, we forgot one very important element: good communication.
Yeah,
right.
It's critical that whoever you send abroad is a good communicator and has high EQ. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I was going to mention too is that there can be really exogenous events that are totally different than what you experience here. And I'm thinking of one example of a few years back. I literally worked on a transaction in Timbuktu. I'm not kidding. That's the actual
place. Yeah.
The actual place. And what came up was that the rebel fighting in the Ivory Coast spread over, and we couldn't transport what we needed to the product to Timbuktu. We couldn't get there.
You literally couldn't get there.
We couldn't get to Timbuktu.
There's all kinds of jokes that come to mind, but I'm not going to use them.
Right.
I'm looking at a sign on the wall that says "No profanity zone." I can think of a couple of fun jokes, but I won't.
Well, we're getting close to the end, so before we end, are there any lessons learned, or just we don't have to get too dramatic, but lessons learned that you want to share with entrepreneurs who are considering going global, or have, and they might be running into trouble? What do they do? What do you do next?
One of the exercises I encourage businesses to do is any statement that reflects on you, that starts with best. We have the best product. We are the best at. We have the best customer service. Scratch that. See what you're left with. Are you going to be successful without that best label? Because the market you're going to go into is going to take a lot of convincing that you're the best. Plus, everybody else claims they're the best. Right? So it's a very important test to do, both from a product and a marketing perspective, to eliminate that best, to eliminate that assumption that others will see you as best, and see what you're left with. And is that going to be enough? And if it's not enough, then you need to rethink your strategy.
So I would add to that first of all, I think that's absolutely correct. You're not the best at anything. Nobody is, right there. That's just, it's especially in an international market that you don't play in natively. The other thing I think that people often overlook is just how much time, energy, effort, and patience is required to be successful in a different place. Every time someone comes to me and says, "Hey, we're launching our business in XYZ company in 6 months because we think we're going to crush it there," I always sort of stop and say, "Okay, great. Like, well, how long did it take you to crush it in America if this is where you're founded?" Like, "Oh, 5, 6, 7 years before we had traction." Like, okay, right. So are you prepared to invest for 5, 6, or 7 years in, again, 1, 2, or 3 foreign countries that you're getting ready to go into? And if the answer to that is no, I don't have budget, I don't have time, I don't have a plan to take it slow and win there the way that you won in your home market, like you're never going to be successful there. There's not natively, not organically. And that's the only way to really be successful with the international expansion plan is to either buy your way into success or to invest for the same 5, 6, 7 years it took you to become the best at what you are best at here.
And think about the impact of the unique issues. So it takes longer, it's hard to do, it costs more, but think about the things for international. So let's think about the currency risk, the credit risk. Think about your partner, and also think about what's unique to your product. Is there an IP risk? And how do all those things play out where it's going to, there's going to be, ultimately it's going to cost you more to do it.
You got legal, you got tax, you got transfer pricing, you got audit, you got all the million extra expenses on top of what you're already dealing with. So if your business, like if your gross margins aren't ridiculous going into that market, you shouldn't be going into that market, because every last penny of your gross margin for a long time is going to go right out the door until you learn what you don't know, until you hire the right number of people to get you where you got to go.
Yeah, I think that if you're desperate right now, it's definitely not the right time. If you're desperate right. in this market, it's not the right time to expand internationally.
I agree, and that's actually one more point I think that it's worth making, is that a lot of times people think, oh, well, the market that I'm in here, in wherever your local market is saturated and it's competitive and it's a red ocean, and like, I can only grow my business exponentially by going overseas, and that is so completely wrong. And it seems logical when you're thinking about it nights and weekends and to and from the office, like, how do I grow my business? It's not the way you grow your business. There are better ways to do it than just take a leap of faith and try to go make it happen.
I mean, it's the same with marketing.
Absolutely.
If you're hurting right now and you think that now you should start your marketing because you're hurting, you're not going to be successful. You need to do your marketing way ahead from where you may think you're going to be losing money. Marketing is not going to turn your business around if you start doing it too late, if you start doing it once you're desperate.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, before we're just about finished, so how can people reach you, Rob?
So best way to reach me is just LinkedIn, look up Robert Loewer, Loewer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your broad perspective of operations and going international. And Mana?
It's pretty easy to find me. It's Mana Mika pretty much anywhere on every social network. That's MANAMICA, or mana@lightspandigital.com.
Okay, Jeremy.
You can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Jeremy Bacon. I think one of the only IEs in the world, so it's pretty easy to find me.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for being here. This was 50 Shades of Business on IntellectualRadio.com, brought to you by Scene Chicago and My Chocolate Soul. Thank you, everybody, for being here and sharing your stories about going international.